All right, yo, welcome back. We are gathered here today with good old friend Nick Haight and good old friend Stephen Hobbs Jr.
Yo.
Now, Nick, I think you actually have the Vijnapti MVP status as of right now for MVP guest status because you've been on so many times. But Stephen, you actually have a close second at this point because you've
Nice,
been on
nice,
a few times as well.
nice, nice, nice.
So, yeah, y'all will
Nice.
duke it out for real MVP this
MVP.
time. I'm just kidding. But cool. Yeah. So, good to have you both.
Yeah, of course.
Good to
Always
be
glad
here.
to be here. Yep. What's up?
Yeah. Cool. So, yeah, today will be a really cool episode, because I think there's something in the reading that we have for today for both of you. So, Nick, if you haven't seen him, his main interest is in Buddhism and has a master's in religious studies, I believe.
Yeah, and another one in East Asian languages and cultures.
Nice, yeah,
Mm.
and specifically Japanese culture is what you're interested in. Yeah,
Mhm.
awesome. So, we're gonna get into some of that today. And Steven is a PhD candidate for something with the liver and
Yeah,
cancer.
so I'm
I
in like
never heard.
basically the degree is like microbiology, but my research is based on liver cancer research, like liver cancer biology kind of thing. So like
Okay,
still I want to know what the cell DNA RNA proteins. So I give the cheese say right the cheese say in Nawawi's book of cheese say. So very
yeah,
excited to talk about that in this episode. Yeah,
nice, nice, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah,
And
yeah,
mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cells.
yeah. Something very
You got a good
important, of course.
background there,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Nick, you also happen to have a background in biology. And interestingly enough, from like a kind of Japanese perspective a little bit. So, yeah, I'm very curious to hear all of that and to see what kind of discussion we get into for today. So, before we begin, anyone have anything they'd like to start with, or
Um, yeah, I think probably because I think I really like want to talk about this cheese say like the proteins because I actually don't know what that is. Basically, the cheat means like just knowing, right? Just knowing. What he says is knowing. So basically, proteins can know when to change, when to like function or to not function based on different events. So they know things based on already like preconceived notions, like preconceived like information based on the environment. So that's very very important. But actually, I have no clue how does that work because like proteins again, they're just compounds. They're just proteins, right? They're not really living
cool,
and say, but like they do know what to change or
right?
what to add. Yeah, to add on certain stimuli or growth or stress or cold heat or hunger or like excess foods. Yeah, so basically that's very important to talk about because I cannot really know like how does the protein know even though it's not really like alive or that's about yeah it's very very
Right.
complex. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Well, let's start with that.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's a great place to start is what
yeah.
does she say? So,
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nick, I maybe we can start with that.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
in his book, as Stephen pointed out, Narby's talking about this thing called chisei towards the end of the book. And it's a Japanese word. So, what is chisei? And what do you think of his definition and interpretation of chisei in this context of intelligence in nature?
Yeah, yeah. So, um, thanks for that question. Yeah, chisei is, like you say, it's a Japanese word, and in everyday use, everyday language, it just means intelligence. So, chi means knowing or wisdom or insight or knowledge, and sei is a suffix that you put on certain words to uh, to imply the state of being. So, um, for
Mm,
example, the word danse is the state of being a man. Um, Dan is one way that you read the word otoko, and otoko means man. Um, and so it's sort of just like the state of, being whatever definition, whatever characteristic that comes before it. So it really does, in a sort of colloquial sense or a conversational sense, directly translate to intelligence in a very one-to-one manner. Um, and
okay.
to that end, I had some sort of problems with his discussion of it in the chapters that I read. I read chapters 10 and 11 for this, and
Okay. So, sorry. So just really quickly, what you're saying is that Chisei pretty much directly translates to intelligence, like as we would normally talk about intelligence, and there's not too much of a discrepancy between the Japanese Chisei and intelligence, like
Intelligence.
the English word.
yeah, yeah. So part
Okay.
of his discussion in these chapters had to do with like he wants to come up with a way to say that word
Yeah,
that is not favoring human intelligence or humanity or
Correct. Didn't it cut out? Steve, can
yeah,
you hear me?
me too. And there,
sorry, you froze there for a second. Are you there?
yeah, Fuji. I think it's okay now. Yeah, I think it might
Yeah,
have dropped a bit. I think it's okay now. Yeah,
might have lagged there.
yeah, a
Steve,
little
what was
lag.
the last thing that you heard Nick say?
Think yeah, about like the how I talk about the Chisei being not really the same as human intelligence or Doctor what's
Oh
his name?
yeah, yeah,
Doctor Narby?
Yes.
I'm not sure Narby, but yeah, but he's like not the same thing as human intelligence, but it's kind of different. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was trying to come up with a way to use Chisei or to translate Chisei to describe proteins, to describe slime molds, to describe other species
Yeah,
besides
yeah.
human. Um, because the word intelligence is like a loaded word, and he thought he could find something in another language that wasn't as loaded with all of this like anthropological,
Yeah, yeah.
human favored, human biased baggage. Um, and the other issue I sort of had was that he had this whole anecdotal discussion of like, first I said knowingness, then I said recognizingness, then I said all these other things. Then I talked to some friends, and he kept talking about this story of how he's trying to come up with ways to describe or translate Shisei, and he never actually tells
Yeah,
us like
yeah.
what he lands
Yeah.
on.
Okay.
And so
That's
that
true.
was
That's
an
true.
issue, but um, I don't think that it's unfair. I don't think it's showing too much bias to use the word intelligence, as long as you are just careful and you qualify it right, because um,
Mm.
we'll get into it more as we discuss things, but um, I think that intelligence fits as a descriptor whenever what you are using the word to describe does not does not fall on the sort of behavior versus decision side of the spectrum. So if something is a behavior, just like sort of mechanical, then you can't really ascribe intelligence to it. But if something is a decision, then you can, right? So if
Yeah.
something is doing something volitionally, right, that's kind of intelligence. If it's doing it mechanically, like the thermostat
Thermostat. Yeah, yeah. You talk about
story,
thermostat in the chapter. Yeah, that's a good example of that. Yeah.
yeah, he was saying how like he was talking to a neuroscientist friend, and how, when we can often think that the thermostat knows what the temperature is and responds accordingly and makes decisions about the temperature, but really it's just sort of like a mechanical response, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's
like
basically programmed into the machine, programmed to do that. Yeah,
exactly right,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
And so therefore the thermostat doesn't have intelligence.
yeah,
But, whenever we respond to stimuli and decide how to respond to those, that implies intelligence. Or whenever a slime mold makes a decision based on where it thinks its food source is,
yeah, yeah.
that's intelligence, that's a decision. So um, that's getting into it real deep. But Chisei, I think, is easy to just say it's intelligence.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. Man, I was kind of afraid that would be your answer, but that's okay. So in other words, we didn't need to go all the way to Japan
Know
to
what you
talk
say?
about intelligence in nature, is what you're saying, Nick. Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's fine. I well, really quick then, just since we're on this topic, what did you, and maybe you kind of talked about it a little bit, what did you make of kind of the anecdote of like the Japanese mind versus like, and yeah, I'm genuinely curious because like it was a Japanese guy saying that. Um, so I'm kind of curious to know what you make of like, is Japanese culture more amenable to this intelligence in nature view, or is it not so much, or what do you think?
Yeah. So I think that Japanese culture, Japanese
And
science,
Steven watches anime, so he knows as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Japanese culture, Japanese science, Japanese academia, I think is amenable to this idea that there is sentience, there is intelligence, there is, you know, intellect to be found outside of the human species. But I don't think that it's more so than Western science, Western academia. Um, there is a whole history of the first sort of introduction of this concept into Japanese biology and Japanese ecology that I could spend forever talking about because I did one of my master's theses on it. But and I won't get into it, but essentially, there's absolutely this idea that you know before we knew that trees communicated with mycorrhizal fungal networks under the soil, and before we knew what protein signaling was, and before we knew all this stuff, and before the Japanese people knew what all this stuff was, there was still this idea that um, plants and animals had, I don't want to say anthropomorphic intelligence in the sense of like, oh, we think that they have the same intelligence, the same smarts, the same capacity that we have. But they did think like, oh, humans have human intelligence and dogs have dog intelligence and cats have cats intelligence. So like that's an established thing.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. So kind of is what I'm hearing. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
awesome, awesome. Um, Sweet. Okay, cool. So, I guess we can just use intelligence then as kind of the operational thing that we're talking about here, specifically with respect to this last chapter of Narby's book. So, Stevie, it's your turn. I have a quote that I had sent ahead of time. I'm going to read it, just so
Yeah,
everyone
that's fine.
kind of
Yeah.
knows where I'm coming from,
Yep.
and then I'll get your take on it. So, um, Jeremy Narby talks about proteins themselves as being conscious. So again, we're kind of at the tail end of the book
Yep.
here, and he draws on Christopher Miller in the following quote. Proteins are intelligent beings. They have evolved to operate in the metabolic maelstrom of a turbulent cellular environment. Transcription factors must know when to turn genes on or off, and the cellular levels of specific signaling molecules, lactose, retinoic acid, tryptophan, or copper, to mention a few cases, give them this information. Likewise, enzymes at key biochemical control points have to speed up or slow down according to their ever-changing demands, coded in concentrations of cytoplasmic metabolites of well life. So, going back to Jeremy Narby's argument that nature does have intelligence, or there is intelligence to be found in nature, do you think that proteins are intelligent? However you want to respond.
Yeah, man, it's very complex. It's actually I'm not really sure because they do things the way they change the function. They actually they can like change formations based on different stimuli. So I guess they are kind of talented because they do know when to change
Mm,
or respond to different stimuli.
mm.
Like, but I'm not sure. Like, is that basically like a program? You know, is that program like into the cell? Like, is that what's like?
Yeah.
I think it maybe is
Um,
a mixture of program, but like it's not really like
mhm.
it maybe it's like common cool information, but that's really hard to get into. Like how is the compound conscious? But I want to say basically just programmed like that. I wouldn't say it's like I think it won't make a new decision based on new information, but it just knows based on certain stimuli. If it's cold, I do this. If it's hot, I do that. But I'm not sure if it would do something like a newer like stimuli. That makes sense, like a newer decision based on the different like stimuli. But I think it maybe in terms of like it knows what to do, but when it knows what to do when it has to do it, like program to do it. But I'm not sure if
Okay.
it's actually intelligent to be like make a new decision for itself based on new information. I'm not sure. That's a very complex idea, but I think it
Okay.
definitely has intelligence based on it knows what to do, what its job is supposed to be. I guess its job is to do something, and it's not the job it's supposed to do. But
Right.
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. Thank you for that. I
yeah,
think this would be a good place to reintroduce the thermostat
yeah, yep, yep.
example that
Mhm,
Nick was talking about.
mm,
So, for those of you, I'll just run through it really quickly. Jeremy Narby, and this isn't just Narby. This is a pretty common model of kind of, well, this is one way of thinking about consciousness that you hear in a lot of different places,
Yeah.
not just Jeremy Narby. So basically, some people make the argument that a thermostat is a very basic way to think about consciousness in that it has a feedback loop. It
Yeah.
receives input from various stimuli, in this case, temperature of the room, and it gives an output of some kind, makes a decision of some kind based on the output that it or the input that it receives. In this case, turn the temperature up or down, according to whatever you set the temperature as. So, I think this is actually a good point because Stephen, you were just saying like it's like they're programmed to do this, and to my mind, it's like, well, a thermostat is also programmed to
Oh,
do
yeah.
its thing, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I personally would not regard, and if I had to take a guess, I would probably bet that you guys wouldn't either, wouldn't regard a thermostat as being literally conscious, at least not in the same way that we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I
like,
definitely agree with that. Yeah. That makes me. I don't really consider like there was any conscience and not like compared to our same being, but
yeah,
it
yeah.
just knows to
So
do. Yeah. Yeah.
let's go from there. What do you guys make of the thermostat model, and how would you use it to inform like your take on consciousness? Nick, I'm curious to
Yeah. You
hear
go first,
your
Nick.
weigh
Yeah.
in now.
You guys aren't going to like my answer. um, I think that whenever and I think that Narby is sort of guilty of this as well. And plenty of other scientists and plenty of other academics are guilty of this. When we see something respond to a stimuli in a way that is, new information to us, we've just observed this for like the first time. If that response is not intuitive to us, if it doesn't sort of fit what our expectations were, then we tend to make one of two mistakes. We think that the organism knows something that we don't know and is making a decision based on that. Or we think, the protein knows something, or that it's, there's something secret under the surface. Um, or whenever it is something that's intuitive to us and it is a response that's fitting with our expectations, we think, oh, that thing is smart, like us, like humans. And I don't think either one is true in any case. I think that the thermostat model of consciousness fits at all scales. It's, it's either a very simple thermostat model at the lowest, simplest, most crude scale, and then all the way up to humans or whatever level of complexity is higher than humans. I think that it's all increasingly complex series of logic gates that, that we tend to mistake for flexibility or for intelligence or for consciousness or for sentience or for, what have you. And I think that it feels good. It sort of helps us not feel kind of defeated by science and materialism and biology to think that there is something more there. But, you know, based on what we know now, based on what is out there now, I personally think that, human consciousness, human brain, human existence is, yeah, just an increasingly complex series of if then statements encoded into, our
Mhm.
our proteins, our cells, our neural networks, etc.
Gotcha. Cool. So just to clarify, because I thought you were maybe going somewhere else with that. So you're saying that basically you do like the thermostat model, but we don't ascribe it, like we don't go far enough with that kind of thermostat model in terms of like emergent properties of consciousness, like I mean, at the psychological, sociological level, at the ecological level. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Sort of, yeah. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
speaking to like, when we talk about this thing, consciousness, what I think it is the thermostat model. I think it is this sort of very complex series of like, I call them logic gates. That's what they are in like computational logic.
Can you
It's
explain what you mean by logic gates? Because I've never.
yeah, it's like if then, or it could be like it's like Boolean operators. It's like if then or and or not, right? When you're coding something into a program, you want it to respond to a particular input in a specific way and put out the output that you want. So
Okay.
it's like, if I'm a piece of software and I get, this input, I should put out, that output. But if I get a different one, I put out a different output. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So I think it's a series of
Gotcha.
if then statements. If I've run out of food, then I seek out food. If I'm lonely, then I seek out companionship.
Hmm.
If I touch something hot, I pull my hand away,
Mm.
or it could be a
Okay.
series of like,
Yeah, yeah.
or statements, or it could be a series of and statements. We could go forever like that. Um, I think it's a very complex one, and I don't think that we have it all mapped out. But I think that that's kind of what consciousness is, and it's encoded, and it's not encoded by anything sentient, anything conscious that's out there. I don't think that it's written
Okay.
on stone by God. I don't think that it's
Yeah.
I think that it's emergent in the sense that it has just happened. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's a ghost in the shell, so to speak. I don't think
Neil
that there's
deGrasse
like,
Tyson is basically kind of right.
what's that?
Neil deGrasse Tyson's basically on the money a little bit. What he's
Kind
saying.
of, yeah. I mean, it's not fun to be materialist and to say like this is all there is, and that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really don't think there's like a ghost in the shell. I don't think that there's anything more. Um, and that's just sort of my cynicism about it.
Gotcha. No, I think cynicism is a good tool to use to kind of explore the world. I mean, I don't want to sound like pessimistic, but I think that, there's legitimacy to that for sure. Um, so cool. Yeah, um I hadn't really thought about it like that, honestly. Or I guess like um the mechanistic view, like I'm kind of like generally opposed to, but and like actually there's a paper that I talked about. I won't go too far into it in the consilience essay that I wrote, but it's basically like, yeah, like the mechanistic view doesn't need to like deny the kind of emergent acknowledgement of like, yeah, we have thoughts, we have feelings, so on
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
so forth. But it can inform it and enhance it by giving it like, okay, this is the mechanism, this is how it happens. Um, cool. Stevie, just for the record, we like to shit on Neil deGrasse Tyson a lot, so if you hear me kind of like bashing him,
Oh, yeah.
he's he's kind
I'm
of
good. Yeah, yeah, I'm good.
it's kind of the black sheep of Vijnapti. But
Gotcha, gotcha.
to that end, Nick, like his views are important because, the reality is composed of matter and atoms and, the second law of thermodynamics and all that. Um, cool. So, Stevie, how would you like to respond?
Oh yeah, yeah. My answer is not as complex as next, but I guess it's like the thermostat
Okay.
thing. I mean, like it's is basically programmed to turn on or off, turn on at temperature higher or lower based on preconceived inputs. I guess it's very like simple to understand. I guess if you want to explain consciousness to like people who are not really into the field or don't know what they're talking about really, so I guess it's a nice entry point to like how to describe like basic concept of consciousness based on like one very well known like device in your home, I guess. So I think like because this is very simple, I guess. So like this is very
Gotcha.
simple to understand like what consciousness could be based on like a pre-known thing in our household, I guess. So
Gotcha.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, cool. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that.
yeah, yeah,
So, appreciate you guys your guys' perspectives. I had
yeah.
sent a few other questions that kind of continue on based on the stuff that we just talked about.
Mm,
Um, I actually thought of a question like pretty shortly after I had sent these to you guys, and I was
mm,
thinking of saving it till the end, but I actually think that it might be a good place to include it here. And that is a discussion of teleology. So, Nick, you could probably tell where I want to go with this. But
mm.
Stevie, are you familiar with the concept of teleology?
I don't think so.
Cool. So,
Yeah.
just a very, I mean, it's not, it's pretty simple. Um,
Okay.
Teleology basically is the reason why something is done. So Aristotle conceived of four primary causes of how you can explain things in the world. The first one's material cause, that's what stuff is made of, atoms, cells, whatever. The second one
Mm,
is formal cause, I believe, and that's like the shape or the structure of something. Um, the other one is first cause, and that's basically the thing that sets something in motion. So if a baseball is throwing or going through the air, just flying, it's because somebody threw that baseball. That's the first cause.
okay.
And
Okay.
the last one is final cause. And final cause is the reason why something is done, the end to which a process evolves or proceeds or whatever. So if you're building a house, the telos of that house, the reason of that house is or of building the house, excuse me, is to get a house. So the
Mm,
to Aristotle, final cause is the thing at the end of the process that it's all leading up to. And so
mm,
um, we talked about intelligence in terms of Chisei, in terms of decision making, in terms of input output,
yep.
thermostat model, etc. And that's fine. And I like your guys' perspective. And it's honestly, I feel like I have to rethink a lot because I do very much agree. But for a moment, I'd like to introduce this concept of intelligence as teleology in the sense that nature is moving towards something. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, again, I thought of this like right after, so maybe it's kind of dumb that I'm introducing it because I don't know what it would be like leading up to. But yeah,
mm,
do you guys think that nature has this teleological dimension of intelligence from
uh,
your understanding of biology, philosophy, whatever? Who would like to go first?
Jump in, Steve. Take it.
okay. I guess theology makes I guess you got to go to like kind of like just like live or kind of grow divine. I guess as like biology as like beings like want to like yeah nature wise I think like just want to survive. I guess I'm not sure that is that like a goal. I guess you just survive and like prosper and
Nick,
like kind of just
what you think?
yeah. I don't know.
Um,
Yeah.
Because no, Nick and I have actually talked about this.
Okay, really.
I
Okay.
forget exactly what we were talking about, but
Yeah.
I was kind of like, is survival a teleologic? Can survival itself be a
Yeah.
telos? And
See, yeah.
I think I was of the opinion that it couldn't. But Nick, what do you think?
I think that a very important component of teleology of a telos has to be intention, has to be
Yeah.
um, an intention, arising, of course, from like consciousness and sentience. And I don't think that this thing that we're calling nature has any of that. Um, if we
Okay.
were to say that it did, then we would be believers in the intelligent design model of how things work, where we think like, evolution is real, but it was designed by God or by some intelligent higher being. Or
Mm,
we
Oh,
would have to
okay.
be, we
Yeah.
would be like saying, God created all of us, or we all exist for some sort of specific religious
uh,
reason.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Mm,
because I am sort of atheistic in that way,
mm.
I don't think that this thing we're calling nature has a teleology or a telos. Um,
I'm telling the Shingon Temple in Seattle.
However, at the same time, while I say that, there are patterns that emerge that can that have similar sort of themes. They have similar sort of things, and survival, like you were both saying, is
Mm.
one of them. Survival for reproduction, for survival for
But,
reproduction, for on and on.
mm,
Um, there's a bunch of arguments as to like how important really is, you know, like how important really are the traits that eventually start to show up in organisms over time towards survival versus how important are they to reproduction, right?
mm,
there was this big shift in biology at one point where it was like, all the traits that emerge for survival, like to live longer, to live better, to live fitter. But then they were like, no, really, it doesn't matter after reproduction. They kind of got a little bit more cynical about it, and scientists started to say like traits that emerge, they only really need to get you to sexual maturity as an organism. And after that, everything else is just leftovers. It's just chance. I always use the example of teeth for this. Human teeth. So I think that a lot of anthropologists and a lot of like
That was a weird way
scientists,
to lead into this, but okay.
a lot of scientists
Go with
have
it.
said that like whenever life expectancies were a lot lower for human beings in the past, one of the biggest causes of death was rotting or damaged teeth, because your teeth rot or they fall out and you get a bacterial infection and an abscess, and that abscess spreads to your heart or to your brain and kills you.
Kills you.
And so like that means that teeth are like poorly suited to survival. They need to be harder, or they need to last longer or something in order for them to actually be like well suited to this thing called survival. But what it comes down to is actually no, they only have to work until you're about 25. And then after that,
it's okay.
after that, it's you're I don't want to say you don't matter in a biological sense, but after that, all the traits that have emerged in an organism, they're just sort of spinning down at that point, right? They're not actually like, and there's tons of examples of this. The immune system, right? Autoimmune diseases are a huge issue. That's sort of a big mistake in evolution, right? The fact like osteoporosis, where our bones sort of lose all their calcium and they start to break after a certain age. I mean, there's all kinds of examples. So, and so I don't think there is a T loss, but I do think that reproduction is a common sort of pattern among organisms and among non-living things that sort of commonly emerges.
Cool. Cool. Okay. Lots to unpack there. So, first, Stevie, you got to switch over to teeth, man. That's your new
research on how to make teeth more stronger and healthier over time.
Yeah. So that we can give life more meaning.
Gotcha.
Cool. No, seriously, and Stevie, I want to start with you for this one. So the biggest takeaway for me there, Nick, was the selfish gene theory that we get from Richard Dawkins. It's not a like a complete theory, but it's a very prevailing narrative within science, or kind of like an explanation. And it's basically like, okay, this thing called life is not really anything more than the genes desire or expression to sustain itself, to reproduce itself. And damn it. And so what I was thinking is kind of sounds like Richard Dawkins might be right about that. Like I don't feel like, I like that, but at a biological level, it's not like, it kind of makes sense. And I'm just kind of curious, like, you're really deep in that biological world of research. Like what do you make of like the selfish gene theory and kind of all like everything else Nick was saying? I forget what else
The selfish gene, I guess,
yeah.
It's basically like you're saying, like to all guys after 25 years old, you got to don't only have to. You said basically, Nick, you said basically after 25, like some genes are not required, right? After 25,
No, not necessarily. It's just that like, the traits that emerge in organisms, they don't serve their purpose according to some scientists after an organism reproduces. So it's like,
selfish,
so like whatever emerges is only has to be good enough, fit enough, only until you reproduce. And then after that, you're sort of stuck with the spin down. You're stuck with the degradation. And
Wind down. Yeah, yeah.
and that could be, 80 years, or it could be like 5 years, depending
5 years.
on what
Cancer,
organism you
anything.
are.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep. Makes sense. Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, I think the basic body wants to reproduce, wants to divide and grow. So, I agree with that. Like, I'm not sure, like, if like that's like the best thing for the body to reproduce, but maybe this life was wants to like reproduce and grow, but I guess it's not for like the being itself, but most for the whole species. I guess if that makes sense. Because
Right, right.
to kind
Gotcha.
of grow, but like not at the individual level. Individual, I don't care if you die after you give you give birth, whatever is okay as long as you keep going. Yeah, as long as you keep going. Like so, I could agree with that model. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Okay. So I think I might be able to save consciousness in like the
yeah,
emergent, not
yeah.
mechanistic sense. Okay,
Yeah.
so um I took a class in my psychology degree. I don't know why I forgot that.
Mm.
But it was about evolutionary psychology. And my professor was it was weird. It was kind of like he was like of the same opinion of you guys, like yes, it is
Mm.
genes and molecules and no, God didn't, like take this
Yeah. Yeah.
Bible and copy and paste or whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like he was also very much like appealing to like this emergent quality of evolution. And his big thing, I forget his name, I wish I could remember. I'll look it up later, but he was basically like there are species that display acts of altruism, and altruism kind of shits on the selfish gene model in the sense that, if the point of the selfish gene is to get a single organism's DNA like continuing as far as it can into the
You know,
future,
yeah. It's kind
and
of,
yet
yeah. Yeah.
some organisms like display acts of like they'll kill themselves or they'll sacrifice themselves
Mm.
in order to continue the gene
Line. Yeah.
of the species as opposed to its own individual organism. Um, that kind of, well, I don't know. It seems to offer like a counter to this selfish gene. It's all about me. It's all about the organism. And nothing else matters.
Mm.
He offered
Yeah. Yeah.
altruism, and that's his research is like altruism as an alternative to that selfish gene model of evolution. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I totally buy it. I mean, it comes down to kind of exactly what you said. It's not me, me, me. It's in a biological sense, it's the entire species.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes in cases of altruism, I think that it can even go beyond like my species. How human beings define and classify species against each other is not arbitrary, but it's also like reflective of what we care about and not necessarily reflective of like real differences that exist in reality, right? Like one of the major
I
ways
mean,
we classify species is obviously like they can't reproduce with each other, right? Like a
Yeah.
bird and a cat cannot have offspring. So like that's an obvious reason to call them different species. But living in different places is another one. If they live distantly from each other, if they look different from each other, and these are all sort of favoring, just things that we can see with our eyes, things that we, you know, that are tangible to our senses and that we decide are different according to the stimuli of our senses. And so, and it's okay to say that cats and birds are different because they can't reproduce with each other, but does that mean that altruism is impossible across those two species? And does that mean that any interaction between those two species is
mm,
inherently like determined by that species gap? It's a certain thing I guess the whole core of what I'm getting at is that we impose categories on the world based on sort of how we think it works, and it may not actually sort of work that way all the time.
Yeah.
mm,
And just because we can't see the way it doesn't work the way that we think it does doesn't mean that it's not happening. And it doesn't mean that you could cut it up any number of other different ways and nothing would really be different. You know what I mean? So All that to say, I think that altruism as an alternative to the selfish gene theory works and is held up by like modern evolutionary science, right? We're always talking at the species level with evolution. Um, and then at the same time, um, I also want to even go beyond just the continuation of the species and think about community ecology or population ecology, right? This higher level than just my individual species is another way that altruism sort of factors in as an alternative to selfish gene, right? Like, for example, humans keep pets, and that is, at one point that might have been a symbiotic relationship between two different species, right? But anymore, I mean,
Mm,
it doesn't serve to help us survive to reproductive age individually or as a species, but it helps
okay.
cats or it helps dogs or it helps hamsters. So, there's lots of examples where um, the ecology of altruism goes beyond my species and
Mhm.
goes into, interspecies interactions and population interactions um, that are larger than just us.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Stevie, you look like you're thinking about something.
Yeah, so I think like Nick was having a good point, but like the goodness species, I think it's like we have ecosystems, like basically like it's basically like if you have a forest, right? You have like the trees, you have the bugs, you have the animals and stuff. They actually work together to kind of like I guess symbiosis. Yeah. And basically like that's kind of basically the whole ecosystem wants to like go together to actually kind of survive. So I guess like that's very true that it's not the species, basically it's kind of the whole ecology system of a certain ecosystem kind of want to live together and like kind of I guess like I guess survive together. So it's not just one species. So I do with that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Interesting. I feel a little better. I feel a little more
Yeah.
emergent or something. Um, cool. Yeah, no, that's a very and Stephen, that kind of goes to like Gabor Mate's book, like
Mm.
how he's kind of looking at the environment and
Yeah, yeah,
Nick,
yeah.
Stephen and I were reviewing The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like a
No, I
book.
haven't.
So it's a book on social health and like basically like health shouldn't just be thought of and not just it shouldn't be thought of in the sense of like, oh, this is how we can like be community and blah blah blah. He's like, no, like scientifically, the most accurate way to conceive of health that we're not thinking about, in modern medicine is the social environment and
Yeah.
social policy and what our communities look like, what are our neighborhoods look like, and he gives a very good case for that. Um, so yeah, it's kind of like the selfish gene, but I don't know, maybe in terms of like life, or maybe like okay, what do you guys think about this? The telos kind of that I just came up with, right, based off what Nick said. Um, what if it's like the ecosystem itself,
Uh,
not just the individual organism, but it's like because like kind of like as you're saying, it's like and symbiotic relationships aren't just kind of like, oh, they just kind of pop up like here and there. It's like there's a lot of them.
yeah.
And I think at the beginning, Nick, you had mentioned mycorrhizal fungi and trees. And Steven and
Mhm.
I watched a video on that. Dude, it's
Oh
like
yeah, yeah. Remember that one. Yep, yeah.
those are completely different kingdoms of organisms. Like it would be like
Exactly. Yeah.
I kind of gave I think I gave this example. It'd be like if I asked a dog to like go buy me a burrito and then bring it to my house. Like well, I mean, and not even then, because dogs are mammals, right? So I don't know.
It's like if you asked a tree to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if that's too much of a yeah, but um, I don't know. What do you guys think of that? Of like the ecosystem is the thing that it's trying to not like satisfy or the health of the ecosystem or something like that, or I don't know. What do you guys? You're smarter than me. What do you guys think?
What have you got, Steven?
Wait, so you said like so ecosystem is smarter or so you're saying basically what's that again, Nick? Wait, sorry, Chris, we said what's that question again?
Uh, what is my question?
Yeah, it's not
Do you think that the telos of
okay.
nature is the continued survival of the entire ecosystem rather than that of the individual or the individual species?
So is it Telos with the yeah, I think like what's the goal of the ecosystem? What's the goal, right?
Yeah,
What's the
yeah.
goal? Being say
The
Telos is the
Hmm.
goal, right? Telos is the goal, right? Telos is basically as a goal, right? So is
Or
there a
like the
goal a
purpose or
certain
the reason that's
uh,
That stuff
going
happens.
towards. Yeah,
the
and
reason, yeah, the
there
reason,
could
right?
not be. I don't know. I feel like Aristotle's a smart dude, and I think
Yeah.
he is, teleology is worth considering.
Yeah. I mean, if Nick says like Telos is not really, what I guess survival is not really Telos. Like survival is not Telos. He's trying to survive is not really Telos based on like nature. I guess nature is basically like can actually include um symbiosis. So I guess basically like I think it can have telos, but I guess it does go to I guess survive to I guess like I don't know, I guess like
Hmm.
that goal is pretty like I guess to survive, but I'm not sure is that technically telos at this stage, but
Okay.
I yeah, I like yeah, I'm not really too sure about
It's
that.
it's still survival for you.
Yes, I guess like the overall like survival of the whole like ecosystem, the forest or the pond or the river or the ocean or whatever, the swamp or whatever, like like the whole like make sure that that environment kind of survives, or is it like still going on over years and years to help each being kind of flourish in that system? But yeah, that's what I think. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Nick, what say
Yeah,
you?
I mentioned before that I don't think that nature really has one. But I know some people who do think that it has one. Um,
Aristotle.
Aristotle
Yeah,
thought that,
Saddle, yeah, Saddle, yeah.
and the guy I did my first thesis on, um, the first ever Japanese ecologist, Imanishi Kinji, and the European thinkers that he was drawing on, they all thought that nature had a telos, and they agreed that it was the um, the sustainability of the community of the whole entire population of different species, rather than the individual or the individual species. Um, they thought that
Really?
yes, they thought that if the telos of everything was survival of the fittest and competition between organisms and who wins in every single one-on-one or every single 50-50. um, they thought that was overly pessimistic and actually didn't work out scientifically. They thought that conflict and fighting and predation between individuals in a species was actually very energy expensive and not favored generally. And so um, the way that evolution works, the way that um, change over time in communities works, the way that communities sort of have longevity in the world, they thought that that was actually a measure of how harmonious they could behave with each other and how they could sort of find their niches and how they could sort of flourish and thrive in their own contexts and control their own contexts and
Yeah,
collaborate with each other to control their own contexts in their own environments and stuff. They did not think that it was like this very capitalistic way of looking at evolution where it's like what organism can sequester the most resources for itself, what organism can defeat the most other organisms, what organism can survive to reproductive age the most, right?
yeah, yeah,
They rejected this whole idea of Darwinian fitness, and they substituted it with this idea of aligned lifeways. um, in Japanese, the term is seimei. It's this idea of like just doing your thing. That's like a very
Hmm.
casual way to put it, but it's like, you know, um, a mayfly, it just does its thing. It flies around, it reproduces in a body of water, and it lives near the body of water that it reproduced in, and it doesn't it doesn't eat, birds. It doesn't eat trees. It doesn't eat whatever. It doesn't infect something else. It's not parasitic on something else. It just does
Mhm.
its thing. It lives its life. It's part of a holistic ecology, um, and it functions in that ecology, but it doesn't interfere with or get in the way of another organism's life way. Does that make sense? And the reason why it continues to, the reason why the mayfly continues to survive, the reason why that community still exists is because it is not being interfered with and it's not interfering anybody else.
Right. We did end up taking a tour of Japan, it looks like, for our understanding of consciousness here. Um, that's really cool. So that was kind of a lot because I was still processing the thing from before, but my big takeaway
Yeah.
from that was cooperation.
Yes.
Corporation. Yeah. Yeah. Corporation. Yeah.
Yeah. So how would I break this down? Okay. Nick, you're very much looking at like the emergent level of life, consciousness, whatever, the ecosystem, etc. Stevie, you're very much looking at like the phenomenon,
Hey,
not
liver. Wait.
phenomenologically, the physically reductive level. And that's not like, a
Yeah.
diss or some shit like that, but it's like you're looking
Yeah.
at
No.
cells, you're looking at proteins, you're
So yeah.
looking at
Yeah. 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 So
biological
yeah.
molecules.
Physical. Yeah. Yeah. Physical stuff.
What,
Yeah.
yeah, what do you
Yeah.
make of cooperation from that level?
Oh yeah. There's a lot of different ways cooperation works, and like so like certain proteins can work together to have a goal. There's like a certain protein complexes we have like a 10 or 20 proteins together one complex to achieve one goal enzyme wise. So I think like the cell definitely relies on the cooperation within the cell. Um like like sometimes if one protein is gone at out of one protein complex, the whole thing doesn't work. So that's what I kind of like. It's like basically like just like it's always like a teamwork. Dude. Always teamwork. It's like it's not just one protein doing a work most times. It's always a huge family of proteins that does like this whole pathway. So it's definitely like the theory. I mean, the idea of cooperation is very, very big in biology for sure, and definitely in cells for sure, definitely. So at each level, like even like cells, tissues, organs all work together, organs, bodies, and like you have like the species, you have like the ecosystems together. So yeah, basically, I guess at all levels of biology, you have a certain amount of cooperation within those things. So I
Okay.
think that's very important to really know.
That's
Yeah,
super. Yeah, dude,
yeah,
that's super interesting. It's
yeah, yeah.
I don't know what you'd call that. Like, I feel like fractal is kind of like overused a little bit, and I feel like
Absolutely.
it's like a little misapplied.
But
Um,
here it kind of
but
works.
uh, okay, I guess I don't know that much about fractals, but how do you mean?
I think that here it kind of works because it's, a fractal is something that is the same shape or the same conformation at like
Right.
many different scales. And this cooperation thing absolutely is, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's like cooperation, coordination at the molecular level all the way up to the population level. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that, like you say, fractal is a little overused, but I think it works in this case.
Okay. Interesting.
hmm
Yeah. Okay. Man, that was kind of cool. I don't know what we just did there, but we came up
yeah.
with something to do with
Yeah, that was a nice
cooperation and life
operation,
and
like idea, life, and
yeah,
also at the
intelligence.
molecule level. Yeah.
Well, and if I can also speak to something you were saying, Stephen, about
Yeah.
the cooperation, at the atomic level, at the
Yeah.
molecular level.
Yeah.
Um, this guy I did my thesis on, Imanishi Kinji, he had a whole chapter, which was, knowing what we know about science today, it's kind of hilarious to read. But way back in the day, it was like groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
this is coming from, like the 1930s and 40s. And he had this whole chapter in his like, his magnum opus, his whole like
Mm.
personal philosophy testimonial book. It's called The Way of Living Things. And he had this whole chapter dedicated to cells, in particular. He tried to do this thing where he like worked his way up from, like the atom all the way up to the population, like we just did. And his chapter on cells really interested me because um, he said that cells and all components of cells, all of the organelles and all of the proteins, they too have a life way. They have a say may, and the health of a cell is reflective of how effectively, how thoroughly, how completely, how perfectly each component sort of lives out their life way.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
it's like if it's not interfered with, if it interacts correctly with other ones.
Mm.
And his whole idea was basically like, at the cellular level, if something goes wrong and two things interact that should not, then it can initiate apoptosis, the death of the cell.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But if they interact correctly, if they don't get in each other's way, then the cell keeps living. He said this
Yeah.
exact same thing can be magnified to the level of, you know, the entire ecosystem.
Yep, population, yep.
The entire ecosystem holistically could collapse if, you know,
Um, yep.
if things don't interact in a harmonious, sustainable fashion. And it was there was a lot of problematic social theory that he was putting forth because he had a specific way that he thought that large mammals, i.e., humans, should interact so that systems
Mm.
continue. Right? He was like putting in all this
Mm.
bias about what he thought they should be doing, but
I'm sure it had nothing to do with like Japanese nationalism or anything like that, right?
oh
No.
yeah, nothing, yeah, no such
Yeah.
thing.
Okay.
um, Yeah, he definitely didn't think that all countries should interact with each other like Japan interacts with itself, But
Gotcha.
yeah, it was this whole thing.
Interesting.
But what was interesting is that he said that because you have to include abiotic factors, you have to include non-living factors whenever you're talking about how proteins interact, how proteins are
Mm.
built, how cells interact, and how cells are built. You have to deal with things that we don't commonly think of as alive, right? We don't commonly think of most proteins as being alive, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so in that sort of sense, he was like, because there's this sort of yin and yang relationship with like living and non-living, right? There's non-living things in all, living things. There's pieces of the non-living environment in me, a living organism. There's phosphorus in the
Yeah.
soil that just sits there and it's just phosphorus, and there's phosphorus in me, a person. And there's also then he thought, the reverse. There's living stuff and non-living stuff. There's organisms in environments, right? And you can look at it from both ways. Um, he thought that that also scaled all the way up as well. So, you know, the cell has these non-living
Mm.
components: phosphorus, sulfur, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, all these
Yeah.
elements that don't do anything by themselves. And they are living. He thought that even populations, even societies, even whole ecosystems must be thought of including this non-living aspect.
Yeah.
Like
So like,
buildings or
Building.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like in order to talk about the human ecosystem, you have to talk about houses and buildings and pavement and, all
Streets.
this
Yep.
sort of non-living stuff.
mm,
Mm.
And
okay.
that was actually like one of his biggest contributions because that's how we think about that now in modern ecology.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, that's awesome. As well. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
lost.
Yeah. Um yeah, I don't this is a weird conversation. I feel like we're like going in like circles, but like
It's the same,
they're
yeah,
they're there's they're like relevant.
relevant. All
Um
together, same topic, same kind of like idea, I guess. Same idea, I guess, makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I was gonna ask the next question because I feel like this is a good point.
Please
Um
do.
yeah, so the next question that I have not asked yet is at what level do you think consciousness then begins? Because Nick, and here's where I'll be a little I don't want to say cynical, because and maybe that's a little biased, but I feel like pessimistic is a better way to describe it because it's like well, I don't know. I'll just say pessimistic, but um yeah, like I don't see any reason why we should kind of necessarily assume beyond the I'm a little averse to atheism strictly speaking, but like this kind of like mechanistic view, even so, but we are still conscious, whatever that means. We're experiencing this moment right now. We're thinking, we're talking, we're conscious. So at what level does that happen? Because Nick, you were just talking about the non-living stuff and the living stuff, and Stephen, that very much applies to proteins, which was kind of um
I was like, yeah,
the yeah. I think we started with proteins,
the
but
protein, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So like,
Mm.
at what point does it begin? And I'm genuinely asking. I'm not like trying to, I don't know,
Yeah,
smarmy or whatever, but like, yeah. What do you guys think?
uh, DNA, because it's DNA, RNA, protein, cell, tissue, organ. Uh, damn, yeah, it's a
Just
tough
running
one.
through all the
Yeah, the
all the
different.
levels of biology.
Yeah. Uh,
The brain is an organ. So if you
yeah,
think it emerges in the brain, then it kind of has to be at the organ level.
Hmm.
yeah, brain's organ. So that, yeah, I mean, if you're thinking like consciousness starts to the brain, that has to be at the organs. Basically, tissue slash organ level. Tissue is basically a part of an organ, but not the whole organ. But organ is basically the whole organ, of course. But I think it between maybe tissue and organ will be the start when you have consciousness, or like it's definitely like cell like a cell interaction kind of thing. Like I think cells have to be together, definitely in a system to maybe like give a rise to consciousness. But like I would be surprised if it be proteins, man. Like, yeah, I would be surprised at all. But like to me, I think definitely be at the organ level. We have cells together in a cluster, kind of like give information between each other and forming some like connection. But yeah, I would definitely would not be surprised if it was at proteins for sure. So yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. Um, I want to introduce an idea, and this is strictly a Chris Castellanos
Mm.
opinion. So you guys are getting the real Vichnapti tour here.
Yeah,
And maybe this will help or maybe it won't, but um, I think that at a certain level, consciousness is reducible to complexity. Um, I very much love my phenomenology. I very much love Husserl. Heidegger is a very, very interesting thinker, and from the previous century. There's something about complexity, right? That
yeah,
we know it depends on complexity. I am more complex than a fish. I don't know what it's like to be a fish, but I'm willing to bet that I have more consciousness or higher consciousness or whatever. That doesn't mean that I'm more objectively important. I'm not talking about like anything ethical or moralistic here. I'm just saying like, I mean, come on, right? Like it's complexity has to play some part in that. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that exactly. Um
yeah. Basically, like he's
kind of
like
just yeah.
you said, like the different levels of like complexity, like more complex, and like I guess like being conscious is basically like it's itself being complex. Is that what you're saying? Like,
Yeah, like or
yeah,
like with the protein thing, like I
yeah,
think from what I heard, you guys don't think proteins are conscious, and
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I
I
wouldn't.
think
I don't
that's
know, but it could be.
well, Steven, I guess you're on the fence about it, but it's
Yeah,
like okay, I'm more complex than a single protein. I'm
yeah,
very sure that I'm conscious, but
yeah, yeah.
protein is not. And even if it's I don't know, not nice or whatever, I'm willing to, put a stake in it that the main thing there is complexity you
Okay.
know, of organization, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know if that leads to anything, but what do you guys think?
Makes sense. Yeah, I think like
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, you talk Nick. Go Nick.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think that it's so what I'm about to say may not actually reflect my own views on the thing. But I'll just put it out there. It's possible that the level at which we ascribe consciousness, the scale at which that happens, is reflective of complexity. Like you say, we see something complex and we do the thing I was talking about earlier, where we say to ourselves, the response that this thing has to a stimuli, it was per our expectations, therefore that thing is smart like us. Or it didn't fit our expectations, therefore that organism knows something that we don't. It's secret, right? When we see complexity in that case, we are prone to ascribe consciousness to a situation. I think that it's possible, it may be the case that ascribing this thing we call consciousness to organisms or to components at a certain level might be self-serving in some way. And I mean that on a species level. It might be self-serving, like for human beings. And it has to do with that complexity. It might be that we look at something that's more complex than the next thing and say to ourselves, we are complex, that thing is complex, therefore that thing has consciousness just like us. Or otherwise, we might at
But
least...
it serves an evolutionary survival end.
No. It's self-serving as in it serves our egos.
Ah.
So it's a situation where it's like, burdened with this very large brain as human beings are. We might think to ourselves that like we're the smartest things in the whole animal kingdom. And we could come up with all kinds of arguments why that's the case. And so then we sort of self-servingly mete out parts of that smartness to other organisms when we see complexity. And so it's like,
wouldn't that mean we're not smart if we're...
No, not necessarily. I don't think that it means we're not smart, but I do think that there is this sort of, I think it's possible there's this egotistical aspect where we see something that is similar to us according to our perception, in that it's flexible in response to stimuli. It seems to make decisions. It seems to have complex relationships. And we say to ourselves, we do all those things. We do them more than this thing does, obviously, but this thing does them too. I'd say that this thing has some consciousness, right? Like we're talking, you mentioned about fish, right? Fish used to be thought of as like, according to the Buddhist taxonomy, fish have historically been talked about as in the same way as insects. So cows and chickens and pigs and like large mammals, those were the things that were meat and not okay to eat because that would require killing and violence. And that's like a sin. But fish, bugs, and plants, they're all okay to eat because they're not alive, right? They're not conscious. They're not sentient, right? They're not a living thing. And so that's why, like historically at different periods, a lot of Buddhists were pescatarians, actually. They weren't actually vegetarians because they ate fish, which we now describe as meat, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why it was thought of that way is because fish are, at face value, very simple creatures. But if you observe a fish that has memory, or you observe a fish that has complex relationships with other fish, or if you observe a fish that can solve a maze, you might tend to think to yourself, that is verging on consciousness. That's a smart animal. That's a complex animal. But that's just because you're observing the things that you think that we are good at, right? And when I say you, I don't mean you. I mean like a scientist, right? Like somebody who's like, doing this. So it's like, there's a little bit of projection. There's a little bit of ego. There's a little bit of self-servingness because you're defining what is smart. You're defining what is complex. You're defining what is consciousness by means of like thinking of yourself as having it and then meting it out to things that have pieces of it according to the sort of system you've created for it, right? So it's like,
okay,
yeah, it's so
like a psychological perception, essentially.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. You're supporting the superiority of your own human consciousness, human smartness by saying, oh yeah, this animal has some of that. and then you
Yeah.
have like a bunch of animals that have some of it, and then you have us, and we've decided that we have all of it,
All of
right?
it, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, so that doesn't speak to where consciousness arises, but I do think it speaks to how scientists would potentially be sort of falling into an egotistical trap in how they apply it, how they measure it in other organisms. There's this whole documentary on Netflix about fungi, and it's got this whole long list of
Oh, Fantastic
stuff.
Fungi.
Right. Yeah. It's got this whole long
Paul
list of
Stamets.
wonderful stuff about fungi. And it's an interesting documentary, but it's like some of it is kind of new agey and pseudosciency because it draws this like metaphorical or this symbolical relationship between the mycorrhizal fungi in trees and the brain. They're like, oh, yeah, this is clearly an indication of a brain in nature outside of the human species. And we know this because there's signaling and there's communication and there's nodes and there's, you know, very large scale response to stimuli and stuff. But like, I don't know. Is it conscious? Does it have to be like a brain to be cool? Does it have to be like a human to be awesome? Does it have to be like a human to be complex? Like, why don't we just appreciate it on its own terms rather than describe it in terms of like what it could be like in relation to human beings? And so, like, they take that too far and they start to say, like, human beings are evolved from fungi. And it's like, well, no, just because they came up, in the evolutionary timeline before we did, doesn't mean that we evolved from them. you know, it's this, yeah, it starts out really cool because there's actually genuinely awesome things about fungi, right? They're like fantastic in a lot of ways and super interesting. But then it starts to sort of anthropomorphize them too much and start to make claims that really aren't supported. And this is what I think that some scientists can be guilty of. They can look at um, they can look at an animal that communicates by making noises with its mouth and say like, oh, that animal is starting to have the foundations of language. It must be smart. It must be like humans. And the reason why is because humans are communicating with language. Humans are smart with making noises with their mouth. So it's like we're biased to sort of ascribe these things to support our own concept of what makes us special as a species.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. Man, now I feel less emergent again. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so I thank you for that, Nick. I think it kind of goes back to the question, and I had a few others, but I think I'll kind of skip those for now because I kind of feel us returning to this question, which is, um, so I would nominally disagree with you here. I'm actually not sure what I think because it kind of depends on this, but I would say, um, the mycorrhizal fungi and the trees like being that kind of forming a brain and being conscious. I would say actually potentially, um, in the brain there are neurons, and yes, they're all neurons, they're all whatever, but like like at a certain level, like and we don't think about it this way, but isn't the distinction between a tree and a fungus, aren't those like, isn't it kind of the same thing? They're both organisms in the sense that they're forming this one thing, and in this case, the ecosystem. But in the second sense, like there are different kinds of neurons, like they're not all the same. But in any case, the distinction there is something that we're imposing on it that doesn't like actually exist in nature. And so to me, it brings us back to the question, is survival itself like a telos or the telos of like life? And I'm okay with that if it is, because I personally see that as a noble goal of like you want to live, you want to survive. Like that's I've got no problem with that. Um, and uh I mean I think Gabor Mate, I think we were talking about this in one of the chapters that we read, Stephen, and if not, it was somewhere later in the book, but he's like anger is a a righteous, noble emotion because its main purpose is to survive, is to help you survive and to continue your life as an organism. And so it's not bad. It's noble in that respect. Um, so yeah, do you guys see survival as being like, I'm kind of asking like what's the meaning of life here in a sense, but like yeah, like is that kind of like the a telos of life, and does it kind
Yeah,
of make sense for it to be that?
yeah, because even like anger, also like anxiety and stress, anxiety like want to be fearful, not like you don't want to go to the forest by yourself. You don't want to be eaten by a bear, or you don't want to swim without a
Yeah.
lifeguard, or you want to drive while drunk. You don't want to drive without a seatbelt on. Just like yeah, you want to always in your mind some emotions that won't keep you alive, won't keep you surviving. Like I guess that could be like something good for sure. But anger, even like I'm not sure, like even like sadness or grief. I'm not sure, like being sad or grief would that really help you survive? Maybe, but I'm not too sure about that. But um, yeah. I think that's maybe very important too to say. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Like I mean yeah, kind of like human existence, like anger, sadness,
yeah. Like
yes, arousal,
also, yeah, it's
competitiveness,
be
all
already
that stuff.
supposed to survive. Yeah, those to go and survive and like try to maybe being sad is like important just to keep going, or I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about that too much. Like being sad, being grief, was that helpful to our survival? Like I know
I mean,
always like yours, yeah, English survival, in your anxiety definitely like wants you to be safe or wants you to be proactive or wants you to be like just have the best for yourself to survive in a role. But other emotions, I'm not too sure. Yeah,
hmm. Yeah.
To my understanding, a lot of emotions are thought of as um, having a survival function when it comes to like the whole species or to communities. So
mm,
it's like we grieve our dead because that reinforces our positive connections to the living and
like yeah,
like reinforces our relationships to them and to keeping the community going. And so um yeah, the ones that it's like harder to sort of imagine, like, what's this actually for? What's the telos of this particular feeling or emotion?
yeah,
Um, in a scientific sense, yeah, it's usually having to do with like, um, you know, reinforcing a parent-child relationship or reinforcing, just like a relationship between two individuals or between one individual and many.
But why?
Yeah, that's the question, but why?
yeah,
So I will say this. Early Buddhism um, does not think that survival is sort of a noble telos. Um, it doesn't think that emotions are fruitful, happiness, joy, sadness, grief. It doesn't think that they're fruitful in terms of, at the very least, making meaning in the world, or finding meaning or finding
mm,
equanimity, joy, peace, whatever. Um, Later Buddhism does think that those things are viable and valid and whatnot, but ultimately, in Buddhism, there is this life, but this life is the bad one, and there's one.
You're telling your temple, Nick, that you're basically an atheist. You're not saving yourself here by talking about Buddhism.
Exactly right, yeah. Um, this life is the one that sucks. This one is the bad one, and then we can achieve something better, by leaving all this stuff behind. Um,
yeah,
that's what Buddhism says about it. That the telos of just survival, the telos of the emotions that we feel, the telos of the experiences we have are ultimately dead ends. They don't actually go anywhere positive. They just sort of self-replicate. They sort of you're kind of spinning your wheels. You're stuck in this sort of same cycle. Your emotions serve to reinforce relationships between you and your community, and your community then enforces those emotions, the things that we have emotional responses to, right? Like to some degree, what we are happy about and what we're sad about is socially defined, and then it just kind of feeds back in a loop. And, early Buddhism sees that loop and says, like, it doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of goes ad infinitum. Um, and it's not productive. So we have to like break that cycle and get out of it because it's not that good, right? There's not permanent substantial happiness. And, though we want there to be, there is sometimes pain and sadness. So, um, personally, I think that survival as a telos is just fine. I don't know if I think of it as noble. Um, I
Mm.
think that's living well, living in a way that improves the lot of others around you is noble, but just survival by itself, I don't think it's inherently noble. And one of my pieces of evidence for thinking this is like in the name of their own individual survival, a lot of people do bad things, very bad things to other people. They hurt other individuals in their community. And that's like, sure, it's in the name of their own survival, but we shouldn't be stepping on each other's toes. I think that it's much more noble to live well, to live morally, to live in a way that raises everybody up.
Mm. Maybe I'll just kind of clip that part out, and then that's what I'll send to Seattle Temple. Kind of save yourself there.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, I'm satisfied by that. And not in the sense of like I feel good now. I do feel I do feel pretty good right now. But
Good.
it's like philosophically satisfying to me.
Yeah.
Um yeah, and that doesn't make our, happiness or sadness like any less. Like it's still there. But yeah, you know, to be a little cosmopolitan here in a Evan Thompson sense, Nick, I would kind of say, well, I don't really care what early Buddhism says. Not necessarily. I value that opinion very much, and and whatever, I do, but um
Also, you can just say
um,
like, fuck all that, you know?
okay. Yeah, yeah. That's cosmopolitan. Um, but yeah, yeah. I feel like that's a good summary. And it kind of ties everything together,
Yeah, that was good.
I
Yeah,
think. Yeah. Stevie,
it
how do
was
you feel
good.
about all
Yeah,
that?
good. Like we started basically at the protein given consciousness, but also we like loved our emotions too. Like I think it was good, like good wrap up summary of the consciousness, I guess. Also with the also remember we did the molecule the protein has like a corporation, cell corporation. We have tissues be cooperative. Also we have levels of community too at the like in society. So this is very good to see like we have some with we all need to cooperate each other to survive. So I think that's a good point to leave off.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, no, that's a good point. There does seem to be this like social dimension, like
Molecule
kind of
tree,
like
like
ingrained in
yeah,
biology.
yeah. So
Um,
that was very good
yeah,
to. So I like a lot, like that a lot. Yeah,
yeah.
I had a good time.
yeah,
Yeah, I would like to return to that. If you guys are down for another discussion.
yeah.
Kind of this
Sounds
like
Absolutely, yeah.
social,
yeah. Part
yeah,
two.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay, well, I'll end here. What did you guys think of? I know you guys just read the last chapter, but it's pretty. I mean, you kind of get the point based on that last chapter, if I'm being honest. What did you think of the reading? What did you think of Jeremy Narby, um, etc.?
Go ahead, Steven. What you got?
I think it was pretty interesting because I never really thought like applying like the what's it called the anthologists to like the mise the on this
Chise?
cheese. Yeah, that's very new to me. Like how to apply that to like proteins. Also really liked how he had the thermostat analogy. I like that a lot too. But yeah, I think I like him. Yeah, that was good reading. I mean, I very enjoyed that too. Really seeing how like how do proteins know things without being alive themselves. So that was I think I liked a lot. So that's my feedback. I was pretty enjoyed by his writing.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, yeah,
Nick.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I enjoyed reading it and I enjoyed discussing it. I'm critical of pieces of the argument, and I'm critical of some of the ways in which the things that he wanted to say were written, right? You know, like we had that whole discussion about how he never really landed on anything conclusive for his translation of Chisei. Um, and I have some other issues with sort of like the assumptions and the foundations from which he's coming at this. But you know, the main thing I'll say is like I actually think that his first book and maybe this book and or this book, I think that we could probably squeeze out like chapter by chapter reviews like we did with Evan Thompson's book and like you're doing with the other book. I think there's enough there that it could be a really interesting discussion to go piece by piece and really break it down and get into the weeds. Um,
Are you referring to the Cosmic Serpent?
yeah, yeah. Cosmic
Okay.
Serpent and or this one, because this one, you know, I don't know if he presents it this way, but it's sort of thought of as a sequel to, which is like odd because, you know, Cosmic Serpent was part of his like dissertation. And
Yeah.
like, you don't really have a sequel to your dissertation. You just have like a new project, right? But
Yeah.
like a lot of people think that these books kind of go together because they sort of build, you know, the first one has stuff that gets built on in the second one. And so like I think it would be cool to really dive in and do more with this because beyond
Interesting.
just like
Okay.
the biology of it, there's like indigenous knowing, there's um, psychotropic drugs like entheogens, and there's like all these other sort of
Sure.
interesting things that play into what he's talking about. And I think it would be fun to pull it all apart.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'm open to it. I'm a little. I mean, that's cool. I'm be down. I kind of see that as one of his more like mystical, esoteric kind of texts. So,
Mhm.
just, since you exposed yourself as this huge atheist, Nick. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not like anti-atheist or something.
I
But
know.
like,
And I'm not really
yeah,
atheist actually when it comes down to it.
okay, sure. I'll clip that out too and send that to the pet monk. I forget his name. But yeah, I guess I just see that one as more like mystical and like kind of like that one's I thought it was really interesting, but I do see it as kind of like pseudoscience-y a little.
Yeah,
But if you guys would be open, Nick, if you'd be cool with revisiting Evan Thompson,
absolutely. Yeah.
he has a really good book called The Blind Spot that is very recent, actually. I think came out last year or something like that. And it's kind of about all this stuff that we're talking about. I mean, we got into like history of science a little bit. He gets into that. And it's cool because he wrote it with like an astrophysicist and like uh, quantum physicist or something like that. And it's very thoroughly written. Anyway, there's this one chapter about life specifically and like biological life and consciousness and whatever. I think I think they actually give a more compelling argument there. And it's kind of the same thing where there's not a definitive answer, but I think it's a more intelligent, coherent argument that they're making for what I see as kind of like essentially a phenomenological view, maybe. Anyway, we could break it down. I think it's a lot more well written, articulate, and has a lot better arguments. If you guys
Yeah,
would
I'm down.
down.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, cool,
Mm.
cool. Well, all right. I'm very much looking forward to it, and yeah, this book is kind of old. It's like 2004, so Stevie, they'll have some juicy developments in biology for you, I'm sure. That aren't like 20 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's cool.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
Nice. I'm
All
down.
right, I'm looking forward to it. And great having both you guys on. This is
Yeah.
the first collab. So
Nice. Well, nice.
this is fun.
Fun. It's fun.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for having us
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. All right. I'll see you guys next time and peace
Peace.
out. All
See
right.
ya.
You.